mentioned you wanted to get a better grasp on Wall Street, like its history and all the wild stuff that's happened there and why it even matters.
Yeah, it's kind of wild how much it's been through.
Totally. So we're going to take a deep dive into how it went from, well, kind of sketchy beginnings to the global force it is now.
And it's amazing, right? It's this constant back and forth of risk, reward, innovation, and, well, instability.
For sure.
A whole lot of ambition, speculation, trying to make a buck, and, cautionary tales you can't ignore.
Speaking of which, our first stop is way back in 1792. Picture Manhattan, but instead of skyscrapers, it's just merchants under a buttonwood tree.
Making deals that would change everything.
I know, right? You'd think it'd be all handshakes and trust back then, but it wasn't quite like that.
Not at all.
Like, take William Dewar, for instance.
Ah, William Dewar. The OG insider trader, some might say.
Exactly. His story, which leads to the Panic of 1792, shows that even way back then, manipulation and shady dealings were already happening.
It shows how greed, when it runs wild, can really mess things up. Shows why we need rules, transparency,
Yeah.
something you see again and again in Wall Street's story.
Absolutely. And it's kind of crazy how that need for order led to the Buttonwood Agreement. This document, which basically started the New York Stock Exchange, was just two sentences.
Two sentences try to bring some order to the chaos. Makes you think about all the behind-the-scenes deals happening even today.
Right.
How these casual agreements become the complex rules we have now. It shows how Wall Street always adapts.
It really does. But Wall Street's got a dark side, too. Our sources remind us that even the big players are vulnerable.
Yeah, and nothing shows that better than the 1920 Wall Street bombing. Still a mystery.
I know, right?
The deadliest terrorist attack in the U.S. until, well, Oklahoma City in '95.
Yeah.
Shows that chaos can hit anywhere.
Imagine a horse-drawn carriage packed with dynamite exploding outside J.P. Morgan's office.
It's hard to fathom. 30 people gone, just like that. Hundreds hurt. Debris found miles away.
It's a stark reminder of the human cost of all this. Yeah.
And to think, even after all this time, we still don't know for sure who did it.
It shows that even with all our progress, all the attempts to predict the future, some things are just beyond our control.
Makes you think, huh? One minute it's deals under a tree, the next this huge explosion rocking the whole place.
And as we move into the 20th century, things get even more interesting. Innovation, regulations, the possibility of both progress and, well, disaster.
Right.
Like Black Monday in '87, not just a crash, but a global panic.
Yeah, you mentioned those fears of overvaluation earlier. What does that actually mean?
Basically, imagine a stock price way higher than what the company is really worth. That's overvaluation.
Okay, I get it.
Back in '87, that fear, along with worries about trade and interest rates, really got to investors. Triggered a chain reaction, everyone selling, markets going haywire.
So it's like that fear, it spreads like wildfire.
Exactly. What makes Black Monday so fascinating is the psychology of it all. See, markets aren't just numbers. They're driven by emotions, rumors, what's called noise trading. Noise trading, that's a new one.
Think of it as a bunch of trades based on fear, not careful planning, just following the herd. In '87, that turned a tremor into an earthquake.
Wow. Most of us weren't even born then, but those same instincts are still around today.
Absolutely. Black Monday reminds us that even with fancy algorithms and instant info, human behavior still matters. Big time. You got to understand that if you want to really get Wall Street.
Makes you wonder what's driving those instincts today. Speaking of social forces, our sources also bring up Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street. A movement fueled by anger. A feeling that had been brewing for a while, what with the savings and loan crisis, the dot-com bubble. But 2008, that's when things boiled over.
It felt like a broken promise. Suddenly, those worries about corporate greed, inequality, Wall Street's influence, it was all over the news.
And Occupy Wall Street, with its use of social media and that message of economic justice, really captured the world's attention.
Those images from Zuccotti Park, the tents, the signs, demanding change.
Powerful stuff.
It felt like a real turning point. People saying, enough. We need to talk about Wall Street's role, who benefits, who loses out.
And even though you don't hear much about Occupy Wall Street these days, it left a mark. It changed the conversation, put income inequality in the spotlight, inspired new ways of protesting.
It's amazing how a movement without a strict structure could have such an impact on how we see Wall Street.
It's the power of shared anger, a sense of unfairness. Occupy Wall Street reminded us that behind all the charts and numbers, there's a human story, a story about power, fairness, what our economic system is really all about.
It's amazing how it all connects, right? From shady deals under a tree to a bombing to a market crash and then a whole movement. It all makes up the story of Wall Street.
And it's not over yet, is it? Every era's got its own problems, its own innovations, its own players.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is how those echoes of the past, the worries about risk and reward, the struggle between what individuals want and what's good for everyone, it's all still relevant today.
You said before that knowing Wall Street's past helps us understand where it is now and where it's going. After going through all this, from those early agreements to this high-frequency trading stuff, what's the biggest takeaway for someone trying to wrap their head around Wall Street today?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing to remember is that Wall Street isn't some big, scary thing we can't understand. It's always changing, shaped by people, technology, politics, and even things like culture and psychology.
So it's more than just the numbers and the fancy terms.
Exactly. Those are important, sure.
Yeah.
But to really get Wall Street, you got to look at the whole picture. You got to factor in the human element, the motivations, the biases, the fears. All that stuff drives how the market acts. You got to understand the history, the booms and busts that still affect how investors think. And you got to be aware of the bigger social and political stuff that influences the rules, the trade deals, the whole system.
So it's about connecting the dots, right? Seeing how a decision made by some CEO thousands of miles away might be influenced by something that happened decades ago, which itself was shaped by, like, social movements or new technologies.
Yeah. It's about understanding that Wall Street's complex. It's about asking the tough questions. Who benefits from all this? Who takes on the risks? How do we make things fairer?
It makes you realize that what happens on Wall Street doesn't just affect investors. It has a ripple effect on industries, economies, even our society as a whole.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about some market or some financial product. It's about human nature, about power, about the world we want to live in. It's about recognizing that behind those skyscrapers and algorithms, behind all the jargon and news headlines, there's a story that we're all a part of.
A story that's exciting and scary at the same time, full of possibility and risk. So, as you keep learning about the world of finance, remember what we've uncovered. How much psychology matters, how important history is, and that constant tug of war between making money and making progress.
Don't be afraid to ask the tough questions, to look at things from different angles, to challenge what you think you know. The future of finance, just like its past, will be shaped by those who dig deeper, who look beyond the surface and face the complexities head-on.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the history of Wall Street. Until next time.